And for most of my lifetime, the vast majority of the people in the world were not enjoying the American dream. They were living on subsistence agriculture and just barely getting by. But since the late 70s, there have been some dramatic changes in the world which has changed that, which has opened the world up to trade and opportunity and wealth creation. If we're going to understand what's happened, we've got to look back in history a little bit. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister of the UK. In the post-war era in the UK, they had nationalized almost all of the major industries. And as a result, they were government-run, they were inefficient, they were sclerotic, they were not growing. There was a lot of unemployment and widespread disenchantment. She immediately privatized 2/3 of those state-run industries. She deregulated others, and she cut taxes. The basic rate of 33% was cut to 25%. And at that time, the top marginal tax rate in the UK was 98%. Who in their right mind would get out of bed on a Saturday morning to work an extra day to get 2 cents on the dollar? For that matter, who'd work on a Tuesday for 2 cents on the dollar? She cut that rate to 40%. In 1980, Reagan was elected President of the United States. He also cut taxes. The top wage rate at that time was 78% in the US, and he cut that to 35%. When Reagan was acting in 1961, he only worked till May of that year because he had reached the level of marginal income where the government was then going to take 91 cents out of every dollar that he earned. And he figured that wasn't worth it. And he'd already made as much money as they were going to let him make anyway. But he felt bad about it because the support people that worked around him weren't in his wage category, and they simply lost their work. And he always believed from that time forward that high taxes were a disincentive not only to productivity, but to advance people's lives. Reagan also promoted deregulation. They deregulated telecommunications, banking, the railroads. A lot of things changed in the 80s. And what happened was the US and the UK economies led a massive global economic recovery. The stock markets of these two major powers tripled in just 5 years. About the same time, 83, 84, Deng Xiaoping introduced market socialism. Reagan had given a speech before Parliament in London in June of 1982, and he outlined how the major collectivist agricultural countries in the world, namely Russia and China, were not able to feed themselves, and yet the US, with a very small percentage of its population involved in agriculture, was exporting about half of our produce around the world. And Deng Xiaoping was smart enough to realize this wasn't going anywhere, so he introduced market socialism. He decollectivized the state-run farms, and he promoted individual property rights by granting long-term leases to the peasants. And agricultural productivity spiked in China because all of a sudden the peasants farming that land were no longer farming it as slaves of the state, but now they were landowners and they had a profit incentive, and as a result they took better care of the crops and the agricultural production spiked. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and all of you students of economics know Economics 101 teaches the trade-off between guns and butter. And there was a massive shift globally out of weapons and armaments and into comforts of life, refrigerators, washing machines, etc. 1992-93, the Uruguay round ended, reforming global industrial trade. And then, of course, in 94, NAFTA was signed. And what happened as a result of all these changes is what I term widespread sustainable prosperity. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You give a man a job, you not only feed him for a lifetime, but you feed his extended family, particularly in the developing world. One kid goes off to the factory to get a job. His income goes up 10 or 20-fold, and he sends a good share of that money back home, and the whole family starts eating better. It's exactly the same thing that happened in the United States in the 1700s and 1800s, incidentally. There's a basic formula for prosperity. To the extent that countries around the world are following this formula, they're advancing, some more rapidly than others because they're only partially following it. But some are following it very closely, and those countries are rapidly prospering. First is rule of law. There has to be some order, some structure. Not command and control, but rather just control so that They can't come and take away the fruits of your labor. If you risk, if you educate yourself, if you work hard, you save and invest, the fruits of all that should be yours to keep. Rule of law sees to it that that happens. Capitalism, individual opportunity. I don't care what you say. Nobody takes care of somebody else's car as they take care of their own. There has to be a profit incentive. Each one of you is here because you're trying to learn how to earn more money and create a better life for yourself and your families. If it were not possible, if you couldn't get anything extra out of it, you wouldn't bother. Competition, creative destruction. Nobody honors second place. We all like a winner. And when we shop, we expect people to provide us with the best quality, on time, at the lowest possible price. And if you do that, I'll trade with you again next week and next year. The inefficient go out. That's just a fact of life. Trade, comparative advantage. One of the interesting things about global trade is countries around the world possess different attributes. China happens to have a massive pool of unskilled but ready-to-work labor. India has an English-speaking, highly educated workforce, but no manufacturing sector for them to rise out of poverty through. Brazil's got vast tracts of land that they can pursue agriculture on to the degree that they're willing to extend their infrastructure to do so. In America, our comparative advantage is our willingness to risk, to create, to trade, to be entrepreneurs, to create solutions, and to send ideas around the world. Property rights. This has to do with taxation. The degree to which you are taxed is the degree to which you're a slave of the state. If they can take 98% of the money you earn, you are little better than a slave. I dare say in the slavery days of the United States, the owners of those slaves actually had to spend more than 2% of the return on the labor of their slaves just to keep them housed and alive and eating. So a 98% tax rate is worse than slavery. And we all recognize that there are legitimate functions of government, but there is a limit to it. And to the extent that you tax your people too much, you will disincent productivity and wealth creation. Sensible immigration policy. My country, America, is a country of immigrants. There are very few people in America who are direct descendants of the American Indian. Almost everybody in that country has come from someplace else. And because it's such a pool of opportunity and hope, people risk everything to get there from all over the world so that they can take part in a system. It's not the country, it's the system they want to be part of, because it allows them to pursue their dreams and exploit their own talents and their own work ethic and make something of themselves. Whereas a lot of places in the world, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you just can't get ahead. How about democracy? You don't necessarily need democracy to have prosperity. In the U.S., capitalism predated democracy by hundreds of years. Our founding fathers were successful businessmen, farmers, educators, doctors, lawyers, ministers, the whole works. They were all self-made, successful people who wanted to create a system that would allow them to continue to flourish and hang on to the fruit of their labor. China has given their people capitalism and opportunity without democracy, and the country's flourishing. Russia gave their people democracy but no opportunity, and the country has been stagnant apart from their oil revenues. So let's take a look at what happened in the aftermath of these changes. This is a chart of the Standard & Poor's 500 monthly. It goes back to the 30s. Incidentally, all these price charts are as of last Friday night. In July of '82, a month after Reagan made that speech, the S&P 500 bottomed out at 107. By March of 2000, it had reached 1553, or a 14-fold expansion in just 18 years. This is the Dow Jones Industrial. This goes back to 1900. Keynesian economic theory dominated public policy in the post-war era until around 1980. This theory involves onerous taxation, central planning, government regulation and programs, socialism,